Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I was listening to a podcast the other day when they started talking about Sonic. The host was never really into him and thought that with the reception of a lot of the games, that the fervor for the series would start dying off, and the guest jumped on him, talking about how much he loved Sonic and about how he needed to play Adventure 2. I'm very curious how that'll go, but that reminded me of another conversation I was having recently about how, regardless of how many complaints I have, I can't seem to stop myself from buying every Sonic entry that comes out. But why though? Like I said, I have a lot of issues with some of these. While this might be a bit out of my wheelhouse, let's give the guy a look and try to figure out just what about him is so appealing. This is either going to endear or blacklist me from the Sonic community. First and foremost, let's talk about the design. To put things simply, he does look pretty darn cool. Primarily blue, he's also got some red and white, flesh tones and a black nose, striking green eyes, and even a bit of yellow on the buckles on his shoes, making him not only have a wide range of colors, but also all the primary ones as well. Blue is also a really good choice for your main character. Either it or red is probably the most popular, which is also probably why a lot of other mascots use it. And interestingly enough, his color palette is almost exactly the same as Mario's, which is notable since Sonic was created to beat Mario. Both even have the goofy cartoon gloves, which I think is especially important for Sonic, since that means that they don't have to answer the question of what his look like. Weird, furry people hands, or ending in claws or something. Nope, these proportions are not only inoffensive, I'd say they're actually kind of fun. His shoes are also simple, but with the red color contrast and the few details they do get, they really stand out, and while his speed is all him, they certainly look like they'd go fast. And while some might make fun of the whole connected eye thing, it's a pretty unique style, and with how far his widow's peak often stretches down, it's easy enough to ignore if it does bother you. Though to address the elephant in the room, he doesn't look like a hedgehog, yet at the same time, with his cute little ears and his prominent quills, it's not too hard to suspend your disbelief and see him as one. Most important of all, though, is how distinct his silhouette is. I'm not sure who first said it, but if you want your character to be iconic, they need to be recognizable just from an outline. And I mean, Sonic definitely has one of the most obvious I can think of. Even when compared to the rest of the series cast, who are designed similarly, you can still pick his out of a crowd. Even the ones who have quills still have theirs styled differently, likely to avoid this sort of overlap. So yeah, Sonic looks cool, is recognizable, and above all, is just a really strong design. They knocked it out of the park with this. Good looks aside, Sonic's also got a winning personality. His attitude is probably the most obvious thing when it comes to games and some of the early cartoons, making him seem a bit cooler, dare I say, edgier, than Mario back in the day. Beyond that though, he's actually a very nice guy. While he might be cocky, he never really does so by putting others down. Well, outside of maybe bad guys, which is understandable. Gotta throw in some psychological warfare when going up against Eggman. And while he might tease his allies, he never really comes off as malicious, and at times, he can build up his friends like Tails more than he does himself. He's also willing to give people second chances, whether that be teaming up with Shadow after everything he did throughout Adventure 2 in the last story, or giving Surge and Kitsunami the chance to change in the IDW comics. He's all about freedom and bringing out the best in people. Man, what a good, handsome guy. He definitely has a lot of universal appeal. But what about the games? Sonic was created for that medium after all, and starting off, I'd say pretty darn good. While there's certainly a lot of rough edges on the first game, I'd still say that it was a stronger start than some of its competitors. I mean, I'd probably give it to Mega Man 1, but I think that one's a little more infamous, and I am biased. And at least neither of them made you suss out a specific path through a castle while under a time limit, and the threat of a title screen boot with a game over. Twice. What the hell with that? Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was pretty well received, and don't even get me started on Sonic 3 and Knuckles. While you could argue that some of the spin-offs and Game Gear stuff was a little more questionable, not nearly as many people are gonna play that stuff, and there's less expectations, due to hardware limitations or them being more experimental. Though I do love me some Mean Bean. The important thing is that those first 3.5 games 3 and Knuckles make things a little weird, formed a really strong foundation for the series, establishing a good reputation and ensuring that a lot of people would have a lot of nostalgia for the blue blur. They were solid platformers, the most divine of all game genres, which were especially popular back then, and the quality was there enough that Sonic was able to compete with Mario, the largely undisputed king of video games. While some people might want to throw out random names like Lara Croft, and I could see you making the argument for Pikachu, Mario pretty much does reign unopposed, and yet back then, Sonic actually was a contender. While some people might still throw around the term console wars, with Mario and Sonic's rivalry, I'd say this was when it was the most intense. Sega do what Nintendo don't. As time went on though, Sonic's track record started getting a bit spottier. The obvious culprit is Sonic 06, I am not calling it Sonic the Hedgehog, which is not only considered one of the worst games of all time by many, but Sega also squeezed out a few motion-heavy games soon after, in the Secret Rings and Black Knight, which, like a lot of games that rely heavily on stupid console gimmicks, were crap and probably could have been a lot better with traditional controls. This is the dangerous part, me talking about my perceived reception of individual games and some of my own preferences. Oh well. Anyway, no matter how bad some of the games are, there's always a few passable and even really great games sprinkled in. People like Generations, Colors, and Frontiers, even if Boom and Forces were seen as jokes. Heck, I've even seen some say that Unleashed was the greatest Sonic game of all time, which brings up another thing, personal preferences. While some games are considered amazing and others garbage, there might even be more with mixed reception. Not a lot of people talk about the advanced games too much, but I really like the first one, hate the second, and while I love the gimmick for the third, really had a lot of issues with its level design, but when I streamed it, there were some pretty big fans of the game that stopped by, while my regular Sonic guy said he didn't much care for it. And even when it comes to the generally hated stuff, there are still those that enjoy it. Tossing my credibility completely out the window, I actually really love Sonic Forces. My point here is that, even with some pretty terrible stuff being pushed by Sega, there's still enough fun stuff thrown in that it keeps people coming back, even beyond just the fanatics. I used to joke that every Sonic release, there's a 50-50 chance I'll like it. Let's see, love Sonic Mania and Forces, dislike Frontiers, and hated Superstars, so I think that means I'm due for another good one. Let's check the calendar, and next we get Sonic X Shadow Generations, a remaster of a game I liked with additional content, so yeah, looks like we're on track. Now, I don't know how crazy what I've said so far is. I imagine most watching this will at least agree with me on the Genesis stuff, though I'm not sure beyond that, but I'm about to say something really wild. Sonic doesn't need to have good games for him to be a major deal. By no means am I saying that I want that to be the case or that I think that it is. All I'm saying is that Sega could decide that, going forward, they want to just continue the Storybook collection, complete with barely functioning motion controls and delay, and Sonic would still be fine. Could be better, but fine. And that's because Sonic is more than just video games. He had 3 cartoons in the 90s, the Sonic X anime, and recently Sonic Prime, along with probably some other stuff I'm forgetting. I think the Archie comics were the longest running video game adaptation until they lost the license, and now IDW's picked it up. Go into any GameStop, Walmart, or Target, and you'll see plenty of Sonic action figures, plushes, and whatever other merch you could want. While I don't think many care about Sonic Underground, and the Archie comics have had their lulls, I'd say the rest of these were wildly popular, and I haven't even touched on the movies. While critics might not exactly get it, it seems like with each one that comes out, people get more hyped as they dip more and more into the actual video game aspects of the series and bring in big names to handle the major characters. The trailer for the third movie dropped the same day as the Nintendo Indie and Partner Direct, and while I certainly enjoyed the presentation, I got so much more out of those short 3 minutes. I am not a movie person, and I want to see that week 1, if not day 1. I am so excited. I could see video games, just like comic books previously, being the next Hollywood trend, and if that does wind up being the case, I'd say that Sonic's leading the charge. My overarching point here, though, is that Sonic is everywhere. I didn't even touch on the mobile games. While Nintendo has always had some cartoons here and some figurines there, I think they've only recently started focusing on expanding into other avenues, but Sonic hit the ground running on that. I'd argue that the only video game franchise that's been more successful in the whole multimedia front is Pokemon. Sonic has a lot of inherent appeal, so kids are still gonna go to the toy aisle and beg their parents for merch and get sucked into his other adaptations, even if they've never touched one of his games before. And those of us who have been fans ourselves since childhood are also going to indulge, some of us more than others. Even if the next 12 Sonic games bomb in the reviews, he'll still remain a pretty big part of pop culture. One other thing I'll mention that only kind of indirectly involves Sonic is that Sega has been doing pretty well for itself lately. For the longest time, I swear, Sega was the Sonic company. They did some other stuff, but I mean, at least I didn't really give it much thought. Sure, I liked Knights and was familiar with stuff like Monkey Ball and Jet Set, but I didn't see a lot of conversation on these, at least not in my neck of the woods. No, it was always Sonic, 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 but these days, it feels like they're pushing Monkey Ball more fiercely. Yakuza is pretty darn popular, and I mean, Persona has really taken off. Yeah, Sonic is still their biggest property, but it's not the only one anyone cares about anymore. And that's good. I still think that Sonic is strong enough to carry himself without any support, but support is still good to have. Flops matter less when you have something else to fall back on, and give Sega more resources. I don't think Ai or Kiryu will ever replace Sonic as Sega's mascot, so the better Sega is doing, the better Sonic is doing. Because what company would abandon their blue mascot who largely established them in the industry? Wait, why did I mention the color? Maybe this is more of a tangent. Sonic's gonna Sonic whether he's alone in holding up the company or not, but at the very least, it doesn't hurt. So will Sonic ever lose his massive popularity? Well, never say never. Forever's a long time, and he wouldn't even be the first blue platformer mascot to lose their household name status. But at the very least, I don't expect him to fade from popular memory in my lifetime. And I'm hoping to live for another 44 years, preferably 64 more. While things might not always be ideal when it comes to his games, I think he's simply too cool with too much going on for most people to ever write him off. I didn't even mention everything that manages to attract people to his series, like his ever-growing supporting cast or some people's odd obsession with some of the characters. On top of all that, there's still a part of me that's hoping that Sonic will regain his early sterling reputation. Sega did recently say that they haven't given up on him beating Mario, and while I don't have a lot of faith at the moment, no way you can compare Superstars to Wonder. If they just can pin down what people liked about his greatest hits, and get the right folks working on the game, I think he could stand a chance again. I have my own ideas, but I think I've already run my mouth enough. Instead, why don't you tell me what you think? How did you get into Sonic? What drew you to him? And do you think he could ever become just a has-been? Kind of assuming you actually like Sonic when I'm asking those questions. With all that said, thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers. I typically do Mega Man stuff, but sometimes I do others. Might even do more Sonic if the comments don't eviscerate me and make me cry. So be nice if you don't want to ruin his chances to make it in my top 20 games list. And remember, Sonic will never die. Son of a bitch!